Welcome to this deep dive into the life and career of Vladimir Putin, one of the most powerful and controversial leaders of our time. In this video, we'll trace his journey from a modest upbringing in Soviet Leningrad through 16 years as a KGB spy to becoming the longest-serving Russian leader since Stalin. This is the full story of the man who reshaped Russia and the world. Putin was born into hardship. His family lived in a communal apartment in Leningrad, a city still scarred by the devastating Nazi siege of World War II. That siege killed his older brother Viktor before Putin was even born. Young Vladimir was tough and scrappy. He took up martial arts, earning a black belt in judo, and became obsessed with spy films. After studying law at Leningrad State University, his childhood dream came true. In 1975, the KGB came calling. For 16 years, Putin served in the Soviet Union's feared intelligence service. He was posted to Dresden, East Germany in 1985, where he recruited sources and gathered political intelligence. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, Putin watched a world crumble. He reportedly burned stacks of KGB files as protesters closed in. It was a moment he never forgot. He later called the collapse of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. In 1991, he officially resigned with the rank of lieutenant colonel. After leaving the KGB, Putin reinvented himself as a politician. He joined the administration of Anatoly Sobchak, St. Petersburg's mayor and his former law professor. Putin managed the city's foreign relations, gained experience in governance, and, crucially, built a powerful network of allies, businessmen, oligarchs, and fellow ex-KGB officers. When Sobchak lost re-election in 1996, Putin made the move that would change history. He packed his bags for Moscow. Putin's rise in Moscow was breathtaking. In just 3 years, this obscure bureaucrat climbed from managing presidential property to deputy chief of staff to director of the FSB, the KGB's successor agency, and finally, in August 1999, to Prime Minister of Russia. President Boris Yeltsin saw in Putin a loyal, capable figure who could protect the Yeltsin family's interests after the transition of power. He had found his successor. On New Year's Eve 1999, Boris Yeltsin appeared on Russian television and stunned the world. He resigned, effective immediately, handing power to Vladimir Putin. Less than 3 months later, Putin won the presidential election with 53% of the vote. At just 47 years old, a man who had spent most of his career in the shadows was now leading the world's largest country. The era of Putin had begun. Putin's first 2 terms were defined by war and wealth. After devastating apartment bombings killed nearly 300 people in 1999, he launched a brutal military campaign in Chechnya, projecting an image of iron-fisted leadership that resonated with a public hungry for stability. At the same time, surging oil prices fueled an extraordinary economic boom. Russia's GDP grew 72%. Poverty dropped. The middle class expanded. For many Russians, Putin had delivered on his promise to restore order after the chaos of the 1990s. He was re-elected in 2004 with 71% of the vote. But behind the economic boom, Putin was systematically dismantling Russia's young democracy. He imprisoned Mikhail Khodorkovsky and seized his Yukos oil empire, a warning shot to any oligarch who dared challenge the Kremlin. He brought independent television under state control. Critical journalists faced threats, imprisonment, and worse. He replaced elected regional governors with his own loyal appointees, and he suffocated political opposition through restrictive laws and selective prosecution. Russia was transforming into an authoritarian state, with Putin at its absolute center. Constitutional term limits forced Putin to step aside in 2008, but he wasn't really going anywhere. His loyal protege, Dmitry Medvedev, took the presidency and immediately made Putin prime minister. It was a transparent shell game. Everyone understood who truly held the power. During this period, presidential terms were quietly extended from 4 to 6 years. And when Putin and Medvedev announced in 2011 that they'd swap back, tens of thousands of Russians took to the streets of Moscow in the biggest demonstrations since the fall of the Soviet Union. Putin returned to the presidency in 2012 with 64% of the vote, and the crackdown was swift and ruthless. Protest leaders were thrown in prison, NGOs were branded as foreign agents, restrictive laws targeted the LGBT community, internet freedom was curtailed. and any remaining space for political dissent was systematically crushed. The brief window of Russian openness that had flickered in the early 2000s was slamming shut, for good. In 2014, when massive protests in Kyiv toppled Ukraine's pro-Russian president, Putin struck. Russian special forces, the famous Little Green Men, seized control of Crimea. A hastily organized referendum was held, and Russia formally annexed the peninsula. It was the first forcible annexation of European territory since World War II. Putin then backed separatist fighters in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk and Luhansk regions, plunging the area into years of bloody conflict. The West responded with sanctions and expelled Russia from the G8. A new Cold War had begun. Putin projected Russian power far beyond its borders. In 2015, Russian jets began bombing targets in Syria, propping up the Assad regime in Russia's first major Middle East military operation since the Cold War. Russian intelligence was linked to cyber attacks during the 2016 American presidential election and the 2017 French election, though Putin denied any involvement. And there were brazen assassination attempts on Russian defectors living abroad, including the poisoning of Sergei Skripal in England, using a military-grade nerve agent. The message to the world was unmistakable. In 2020, Putin rewrote the rules of the game entirely. He pushed through sweeping constitutional amendments that reset his presidential term clock to zero, potentially allowing him to remain in power until 2036, when he would be 83 years old. The amendments were approved in a national referendum with 78% of the official vote. Critics called it nothing less than a constitutional coup, designed to make Vladimir Putin president for life. On February 24, 2022, Vladimir Putin launched the largest military invasion in Europe since World War II. Russian forces attacked Ukraine from multiple directions, aiming to capture the capital Kyiv within days. They failed. Ukrainian resistance, fierce and determined, pushed the Russians back. What followed was a grinding, devastating war that has killed and wounded hundreds of thousands on both sides, displaced millions of Ukrainian civilians, and triggered the most sweeping Western sanctions in history. The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin himself over the forced deportation of Ukrainian children. Today, Vladimir Putin is in his fifth presidential term, having won in March 2024 with a reported 87% of the vote. His most prominent opponent, Alexei Navalny, the anti-corruption activist who had survived a poisoning attempt widely attributed to the Kremlin, died in a remote Arctic prison just weeks before the election, under circumstances that remain deeply suspicious. With all genuine opposition eliminated and independent media silenced, Putin faces no real challenge to his power. The war in Ukraine grinds on, and Russia's relationship with the West sits at its lowest point since the darkest days of the Cold War. So what is Vladimir Putin's legacy? He took a country in chaos and restored order, but at the cost of freedom. He made Russia a global power again, but through aggression that has isolated the nation. He brought economic stability, then gambled it all on a devastating war. He redrew the map of Europe by force for the first time since 1945, and he may remain in power through 2036, more than 3 decades of one-man rule. Whether hero or villain depends on who you ask. But there's no question that Vladimir Putin has reshaped the world, and that the consequences of his choices will echo for generations to come. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who'd find it interesting. Drop a comment below and let us know. What do you think Putin's ultimate legacy will be? We'll see you in the next one.